All right, we're back with part two of our conversation with Brent Haglund, who ran the Sand County Foundation for many, many years, now retired. Kevin McAleese runs it now, and well, I'm sure Brent would say or agree. But we were talking, we were impinging on ideology a little bit, maybe politics, but I was sensing that you didn't think, or one might not pick up much land ethic in the Green New Deal. Is that an unfair summary?
I would put it this way. Undoubtedly, people who are committed to the Green New Deal have a motivation that is to do good for the community. I'm sure that's a motivation. I don't know enough about the Green New Deal to comment on specifics, but I've raised this question to all of us, and that is, what can we measure? It's a principle of Sand County Foundation's work. It's at the heart of many other conservation groups. And is there a chance here to question by going to the evidence, actual evidence, not models, which are hypotheses or, if you will, speculation upon evidence, and instruct ourselves as to what we might do with smaller amounts of money and with smaller amounts of imposition of rules and regulations on people. And just one quick example I would use, and that has to do with coastline sea level relationships. It's said that the oceans are rising relative to land. That's of enormous cost to people, of course, as that's happening. And yet, the evidence is strongest that there are different parts of the ocean coastal world that are actually going down relative to sea much, much faster than otherwise.
Yeah.
What does that bear on it? First of all, it's measured. Secondly, it's of enormous economic cost. Third, it's localized. And it's an opportunity to take what might be motivation out of the Green New Deal and put solutions to work at a community scale or the state scale. And I don't see much in what little I know about the Green New Deal that is directing human talent, money, and emphasis to communities and states. Instead, it's with a very broad brush. Many of the solutions can be sought in local and state reaches of spans and government.
So is conservative environmentalism as back on its heels as one might think just by reading the public discourse, or are there, you mentioned local, state and local, I mean, are things as bad as they seem to someone like me for conservative environmentalism?
A conservative environmentalist can, again, go to evidence. And I think the evidence can take us a long way to show that, one, wildlife in a general sense in the United States is vastly better than it was at the time of Alva Leopold's work. We have had flying right over our house here in Madison, Wisconsin, bald eagles. Growing up in north central Minnesota, I thought a bald eagle flying over was an extremely unusual sight. They're doing better than most people could have imagined. Wildlife, in many cases, is an environmental achievement that's come out of private land enhancement. Ownership has given rise to much of that success. Another thing about it that I think is tied to conservatism is you can measure it. And thus, then there's the issue of soil. Soil is the source of all of our food and fiber, even to a degree that coming out of the ocean, it relies on healthy soil. And there are ways in which freely acting farmers and ranchers and foresters are using the principles of good land management, better land management, working with their neighbors, and thus through independent individual responsibility, acting on their own, they move towards improving water quality by keeping more of the fertilizers that would damage water, keeping them on the land, and reaching out to their neighbors. So is conservative environmentalism alive? Yes. Is it growing? Yes. Is it sound? Of course it is.
Brent, may I ask a question? I guess I'll drag you back toward philosophy again, but what stirred the question in my mind is a project that Sand County had in Africa, not anything that was not complementary to or really assisted in the mission of the Sand County. But I'm thinking here of the recent sort of difficulty worldwide with the pandemic. And what I'm interested in is sort of, again, thinking about a juxtaposition of sort of the way the environmental movement today, as you say, there are some intersections and so forth, talks about it in I call it spiritual sense, but sort of a general, everyone will be well when carbon is adjusted to this and water levels are that and so forth. But if I could ask you, given all the Leopold's attachment to the land, and as you say, interest in science, measurement, landowners, incentives, is there something in the pandemic that you sense or you've had evidence of that you think really not complementary to, but would draw people to an understanding of the land that Aldo Leopold had, given the sort of duress that people were under in terms of giving up a sort of freedom they might have had with their own property or their understanding of their environment, whether they live in the city or in the south. Is there anything that has struck you with respect to maybe people adjusting their mindset about conservation, about land ownership, the importance of soil, what goes there apart from animals over the top of the soil, what grows in it and so forth, and applying science to making those things all work even better and protect them?
I'll start with food. And I'll start with the kind of food that many of us really like and others we stay away from. That's oysters. And a oysterman on the East Coast couldn't say, Dan has not been able to sell oysters, hadn't been able to sell oysters for quite some time because the restaurants to which he supplied weren't buying. They weren't open. What did he do? That gentleman bundled up his oysters and at an appropriate distance shared them household by household in his area. And he said, where I need to go with this is I need to take care of my neighbors. He said, where I can go with this is I've got food that I can't otherwise make use of. And the third thing is that when I keep my oyster business going, I'm going to be in a better state to make it profitable and successful and environmentally sound if I develop an enhanced relationship with my own community. Another example I would give, going right to your COVID case, is Namibia. Across Africa, the most outstanding successes, Dan and Mike, in wildlife conservation come out of Namibia, increasingly to some large degree Botswana as well, but we'll take Namibia. A key part of what's happened in Namibia, reinforced by the Bradley Funded Environment, are those community-owned tracts where the people on the land, villagers and others there, have an ownership stake in the wildlife that they can use for tourism and limited managed hunting and such. They're preparing for, not that they didn't lose revenues and such because of decreased tourism, they're preparing for a rebound that they will get because they've got enough resources, being more fiscally sound than many other villages across Africa. with that profitability, with that mindset that we are in this together, that we have joint ownership as a community, I think that's a case where the challenge of of the COVID-19 pandemic, I wouldn't say was solved, but I think there's a resilience there. And I think that resilience is what ties that Namibian case together with the oysterman who's feeding his neighbors with his oysters. Both of them have a sense, whether it's the community or the individual, have a sense of optimism and resilience. And I think that's there.
How about Brent? Has polarization affected funding of environmental groups, wherever they might be on the ideological, spectrum? What has the political polarization, ideological polarization done to the funding of groups, including like yours?
There's the unfortunate business, in my opinion, of tying conservative or liberal or progressive strictly into a political context. Yes, there are loggerheads. Yes, there's a risk of things that are associated with climate change taking what you might call sucking all of the oxygen out of the room for environmental philanthropy that could be directed to actual solutions, some of which are related to how climate change can be ameliorated. So yes, there are some things of great impact, particularly a focus on climate change, which is unfortunately squeezing, even from private foundations and private individuals of means, squeezing their contributions towards those and away from, we'll call them projects, practices, and people who can get things done in shorter periods of time.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we end it there? Brent Haglund, thanks so much for doing this with us today. We totally appreciate it and wish you the best of luck in your continued vibrant retirement.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Dan. Mike, thank you for this opportunity.